There is a huge craze in the personal development world, about being positive and just being happy all of the time. But in reality, the real truth is that a lot of the times, being positive can actually have a very detrimental effect to you going off and doing something great on planet Earth and accomplishing your trading goals. And playing big, starting a business, becoming a trader, becoming an entrepreneur, becoming a great athlete, whatever it is that you are doing and trying to attempt, having solely a positive outlook can sometimes be a huge detriment to that. Positive thinking is only half the equation. It's a half truth that the masses are able to stomach and they love to hear it, but it's not where the masters of this world are playing. Because there's a whole other side to it. There's actually a power to negative thinking. So we're going to draw a diagram that represents the human mind with two parts of our brains. So up at the top, we have the higher mind. Think of this as your soul, your spiritual realm, your thinking brain. Down at the bottom, we have the lower animal mind. So these are your emotions, your senses, your physical realm. So that's basically everything that you can see, touch, hear, and smell, right? So up at the top of the diagram, think of this as light. And then down at the bottom, think of this as matter, so physical objects. Now in physics, we know that if you are a photon, you are a particle of light. You have no time, no space, no charge, and no mass. But down in the physical realm, things are a lot different. So when you get two photons, when you get two particles of light, and you smash them together, they then split, and you create an electron and a positron from that particle of light, and then they gain mass. So down here in the physical realm, you have mass, you have charge, you have space, and you have time. In science, we know that an ion is a charged particle. In psychology, we know that anyone who has an emotional perception of something, we say they are emotionally charged about it, right? So down here in the physical realm, whenever you sway away from balance and neutrality and you experience a feeling of perhaps, pure elation and you have a positive charge. But Newton's third law tells us that for every action in the universe, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So this means that the more elation that you feel, the more depression that you will inevitably feel afterwards when you eventually realize the negatives to your situation that you were initially blinded to before. So before, maybe when you were initially elated because you were only seeing the positives of an event or in a situation or maybe another person, but then eventually as you start to become conscious and aware of the actual negatives, risks and drawbacks to that event or situation or person, and now you are feeling negatively charged, right? You've swung all the way back the other way. So you've gone all the way from pure elation and now you've swung into depression. So elation and depression, they will always be balanced and conserved in your psyche, and that goes for every single polarizing emotion. Pleasure and pain, greed and fear, skepticism and naivety. So often people spend their entire lives oscillating between those two poles. I'm depressed, I'm elated, I'm depressed, I'm elated, I'm depressed, I'm elated. Right? They're literally, yo-yos just swinging back and forth. Now, I'm sure we've all come across someone in our lives who is just so emotionally charged and volatile like that. Now, down here is where the masses are. They live their entire lives oscillating from one polarity to the next, back and forth, back and forth. They are constantly polarized and manipulated by, governments and the media and just other people in general. Now, to master your life and to master your trading is to pull out of these emotional oscillations. So the reason that I've drawn a diagram like this, like a triangle, is because it's a pendulum. So I want you to think of a pendulum, right, swinging back and forward, right? So down here in the lower mind, the animal mind, it oscillates back and forth, right, with that big swing. So down here, your lower mind oscillates according to the laws of polarity, rhythm, and vibration. But then as you move up and you start using your higher mind, the length of the pendulum becomes smaller and smaller, and the vibration becomes faster and faster, and you are literally vibrating at a higher frequency. So higher vibration is up at the top, and a lower vibration is down at the bottom. So this means that evolution is towards the light. That is where the masters play, because they see both sides of the coin to every single situation in life. They see both the positives and the equal negatives. But the losing, 70, 80, 90% of traders, those are the masses down here at the bottom. The masses are constantly trying to seek only pleasures and completely avoid pains. They try to stick only to the one side, chasing a fantasy of a life that maybe only consists of happiness, that only consists of winning trades with no losses. But in doing so, in trying to chase that fantasy, they just get stuck in a constant revolution, back and forth. Because the more that you try to swing to the right, and chase all of the positives without the negatives is the degree to which you will then snap back and swing to the left into those perceived negatives. And that is literally how people become bipolar, chasing the one pole, the one side. So let's talk about the polarities of skepticism and naivety in trading for a minute. So bringing your stuff into the market. Now, if your beliefs about trading are balanced, realistic, and empowering, you will naturally have the greatest probability of success. Now, in the previous lesson, we just looked at in depth how much money you can make in trading, especially with access to prop firms or potentially investor capital. Now, some of you will have watched that, and you may be a little bit intoxicated by it. You've done the math on a compound interest calculator, and you can see how much money you could be potentially making in what is a relatively short period of time, and that can be extremely exciting and motivating. Now, others of you could react completely differently, and you could be very skeptical of it, and you may question the viability and the probability of being able to make that kind of money. So if your beliefs kind of sway more towards naivety and fantasy on the right, so thinking, actually, Forex is amazing. I'm going to get funded in just 1 month and I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start consistently making 6 figures every single month. It's easy. I saw some random guy do it on Instagram. He's got a Rolex and perfectly straight white teeth. It must be true. I'm going to have a Lambo by Christmas, right? We've all heard these people before. But then the complete flip side to that is if these beliefs sway, all the way towards skepticism and resentment to the left, you're thinking, Forex is an absolute scam. I only ever take losing trades. It's impossible to win. There's no way anyone can make any money in it. It's way too hard. It's all a lie. I hate it. It's bullshit. Right? If your beliefs sway between these two poles, then naturally you will lower your probability of success. So the more balanced, realistic, and empowering you can keep your beliefs, the higher probability of success you will have. So how do we keep our beliefs as balanced and realistic as possible, but still be empowered and motivated? Well, wisdom is the instantaneous recognition of both sides to an event. So wisdom is the instantaneous recognition of both sides to an event. And it's the individual who can see both the advantages, the positives, but also see the drawbacks and the risks and the challenges at the same time, simultaneously. That is the person who is extremely aware and who is best prepared and who has the highest chance of achieving success. Because people go forward with things that they want to achieve in life. A lot of traders, they maybe go off and get funding, or they want to get funding and they're focused on the funding, and they only see the advantages to the funding. But they're extremely naive about the realities of investor or prop funding. Maybe they've got some fantasies around the funding and what that funding could possibly do for their life. And they're only seeing and focusing on all of the positives, but they're not aware of the real risks, the real challenges, the real drawbacks and disadvantages that there actually are to trading funded capital. So when some of them maybe accomplish that funding, pursuing their fantasy, and when they get that funding, they can end up sometimes feeling a little bit betrayed because they realize that actually there are drawbacks and risks here that maybe I was initially blinded to because they were naive about it, because they were only perceiving the positives. So as a result, they can sometimes end up losing the funding, and you can end up self-sabotaging, and then they end up feeling betrayed by that particular funding. Master traders, however, they're not overrun by fear and greed, pleasure or pain, skepticism or naivety, because they evolve toward the light, toward the soul. They are objective and they seek the truth. They seek actuality. Now, I want each and every one of you to enter that 10% of traders, to see the light and become a master trader. That is my mission, to help you reach and maintain that level. And that's the journey that we're going to go on throughout this program. Hence the name Photon Trading. That's what, part of what it means to be, but also to embody being a photon trader. The part of your mind that seeks actuality is your higher objective mind. And as a trader, you must always strive to achieve objectivity. So in other words, you must seek to see the entire picture, including the entire array of potentially less complete realities. So engaging your higher objective mind and seeing the whole picture for what it actually is, so seeing the benefits and the drawbacks of every situation, what that does is it allows you to pull yourself out of artificial certainty or maybe fear, so then that allows you to act methodically with a clear mind. And that is how you give yourself the highest chance of success from the very start. So, the $1 million question is, how do we actually transcend these two poles so that we can develop and maintain a neutral perspective and keep our decision making as objective as possible? How do we separate ourselves from the losing masses and become master traders? Well, there is an extremely simple and practical task that we're about to do in a minute in order to achieve that, in order to transcend those two poles. But just before we do that, first we're going to take a quick look at another slightly different diagram, another way of illustrating the human mind. So if we draw this line down the middle, we have negative charges or perceptions at the bottom, and then we have those positive charges and those positive perceptions towards the top. And then if we draw a line from the left to the right, this represents the concept of time. So all the way to the left is the past, and then this moves through to the present in the middle, right? Where those lines cross, that circle is the present. And then all the way to the right, we have the future. Now the future and the past, they do not exist. They are only constructs of the human mind. Because anything that is in the future, that can only exist in your imagination. And anything that is in the past, that is just something that only exists in your memory. The present is all we have. The past and future don't exist outside of your mind, because you can never really go to the future, because once you get there, right, it's now just a new present moment with its own past and its own future. So you can only access the past via your memory, and you can only access the future via your imagination. So if we look at the bottom left quadrant of this diagram, this is where you can remember something from your past. So it's a memory from the past that you have assigned a negative charge to. So let's say you experienced something when you were younger and you have a really bad perception of that event. Like let's say you got bullied in school or something, then you will feel resentment about this past negative memory because you are holding on only to the perceived negatives of that event happening in the past. And you are completely blinded to the positives of that event actually happening. You haven't yet had the awareness to realize that there were positives, potentially such as, actually, you know what? That bully hardened me up. He helped me to stand up for myself, not to be pushed around in my adult life. And it actually led to me having a successful career and a much better social life. But if you are still feeling resentment about that bully that you maybe had in school, and you're still holding on to that negative memory, then you're still going to be holding on to that resentment. So then if we look at the top left quadrant, this again is in your memory of the past, but this time it contains events in your memory that instead you have assigned a positive charge to. So again, let's say you experience something in the past that you have a really positive perception of, then you will feel infatuation about this past positive memory because you are holding on only to the perceived positives and benefits of that event in the past. And you are completely blinded to, or maybe you've just completely forgotten the negatives and the drawbacks to that event or that person in your memory. And this is often, when you hear people talk about, oh, back then it was the glory days, things were so much better back in my day, blah, 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 because they are only focused on the positives that they choose to remember. And then they are infatuated with that time in the past because they have forgotten all of the negatives and the drawbacks that they were actually experiencing back then, but they've just forgotten them. So, maybe when they think it was so great back in their day, but actually, they didn't have a high-speed internet, they didn't have smartphones or cheap international flights or whatever. And actually, life wasn't that great back then compared to now. So that line in the middle of this diagram, right, that line that is drawn vertically down the middle, that line between your memory of the past and your imagination of the future, that line there is actually a mirror. And that mirror reflects forward your memories of the past. It reflects them into the future. So negatively charged memories of your past in the bottom left, these are mirrored forward to create negatively charged future imaginations. So if you have resentment in the past about something, that is then mirrored forward into the future in your imagination as fear. So that past negative memory, it manifests itself in your imagination as a future fear. So past resentments lead to future fears. So any charges from your past, they will be mirrored into your future, and they will cause you to seek, avoid, and compensate rather than act with certainty, presence, and power. So for example, let's say you are violently bullied in school, right, at your first lunch break. So then you will then have a resentment charge in your memory of literally what just happened. And then you may have a strong fear that it could happen again at your second lunch break, and that is giving you an immediate future fear in your imagination. Now, if you were violently bullied, say 10 or 15 years ago, you may have a fear that it could happen again sometime in the next 10 or 15 years, and now you have built up a general fear, right? And that's all in your imagination. Now, since time and maturity can naturally reveal the benefits to these kinds of, negative resented charges, those charges may gradually dissipate throughout your life. And then as your past resentment dissolves and it disappears, because you've realized the hidden positives to that event, then so does your future fear start to slowly disappear. So that's literally how you can eliminate any fears that you may have in your life. Because once you've become aware of the positives of that past event, that past resentment in your memory that is causing a future fear in your imagination, you will now see both the equal negatives and positives. So you have neutralized the charges on that event, and the fear and resentment completely disappears. But if the negative perception of the bullying persists and you never break the resentment, your fear could sustain throughout your entire life. So if you are fearful about something, you should spend the time asking yourself, what in the past maybe am I resentful of that is causing this future fear? And once you locate what that past resentment is, then you can list all of the benefits of that event occurring in the past. And then when you list as many positives as negatives, you will then dissolve your fear. It will no longer exist because you now have a complete awareness. So what has literally happened here in terms of physics is you have synthesized the negative and positive charges together to create a photon, to create a particle of light, so that you finally see the light and you are now what people call enlightened, right? Because you are more wise. So neutralizing fantasies and fears, it pulls you back into presence. It pulls you out of living in your imagination and it pulls you back into the present. So many people are just constantly worried or fearful of things happening to them in the future. Maybe they were cheated on by a partner in their past and they're holding on to resentment for that. So now with their current partner, they're worried and they're fearful that their girlfriend or boyfriend may cheat on them in the future, but they just aren't aware of all of the positives to that event actually happening, if they went and cheated on them. Because if your partner cheats on you, you get to dump them and fuck someone else. So if you list, 10 action steps that you can take to lower the probability of that thing happening that maybe you're fearful or worried about, and then list 10 benefits of that thing happening that you're fearful of, and then go further and actually list 10 drawbacks of that thing not happening that you're fearful of. Like for instance, let's say maybe you're worried about losing your job, right? But if you hate your job, then you get to leave and you get to do something else. That's a great benefit. And what's the drawback of you not losing your job? Well, then you have to stay doing something that you hate, right? So you can see how doing this process, it will help you to dissolve that fear or worry. So then up on the top of this diagram, right, the positively charged past memories that you are infatuated with, these are also mirrored forward into your future, into your imagination of the future as fantasies. So your past infatuations lead to future fantasies. So those future events in your imagination in which you can only see the positives and you are unaware and blinded to the negatives, the risks and the drawbacks to that event occurring. So a fantasy that is very common and relevant is acquiring investor capital or prop funding to trade. Now the majority of traders fantasize about acquiring funding and trading a much larger account size than maybe what they currently have. Of course there are really obvious benefits, right, to acquiring investor capital or prop funding to trade with the main one clearly being that the bigger your account size is, the more money that you can potentially make, right? Now, many traders, they only think about such positives as these, that acquiring that funding is going to solve all of their problems. That they will suddenly be making bucket loads of money every month and life will finally be easy and smooth. No more worries, right? But if you are fantasizing about getting funded and you are unconscious of the negatives and the drawbacks of trading prop or investor capital, then you will lower the probability and or the speed of you actually successfully acquiring that funding, or you may even lower the probability of you actually being able to hold on to and staying funded once you have it. Because if you put, getting funded, if you put it up on this big pedestal and you're constantly looking up to it as this big massive event that you need to make happen, as this big positive event with no drawbacks, that you're fantasizing about, then you not may feel worthy until you are funded. And you may think that being funded or not is the difference between you being a success or not. So then it becomes a part of your self-worth. So then when you inevitably experience losing trades in the market, which are completely unavoidable, by the way, losing trades are just simply a cost of doing business, you will then see every single loss as a direct threat to your plans of achieving your fantasy. So then you will take every single loss personally, and your trading will start to become very, very hard for you. And you will be fighting an uphill battle. This constant struggle because you are continuously self-sabotaging. And this is part of the reason why so many people, they actually do get funding, but they end up just losing their account within a few months. So remember, wisdom is the instantaneous recognition of both sides to an event. And the quicker that you can realize and find the negatives within your future and past positive charges, and the positives within your future and past negative charges, then the quicker you do this, the wiser you become and the more you are mastering your life. Now, I appreciate that's a bit of a tongue twister. And sometimes it can be a little bit of confusing, just to get your head around all of those words. But in more simple terms, if you can find the positives after only seeing the negatives of something, or if you can find the negatives after only seeing the positive side of something, then your beliefs will become a lot more balanced, realistic, and empowering. And when you do that, you are rapidly increasing the probability of successfully achieving your goals. So when you do this, and when you find the negatives and drawbacks to your future positive charges, to your fantasy of acquiring prop funding capital, and the positives and benefits to your future negative chances, so the positives to your fears, maybe you have fears of not getting funded, or maybe you have fears of losing your funding when you already have it. When you do this, you annihilate both those positives and negative charges, and you will see the light. So at that moment, you dissolve your mirrored fears and fantasies of the future. So I appreciate that, all of that, especially if it's the first time you have heard these concepts and philosophies, all of that can seem pretty esoteric and maybe a little bit wishy-washy or airy-fairy to you, right? Whatever you want to call it. So I'll tell you what, let's actually get a little bit more practical and perform a simple but very effective exercise to dissolve any fantasies that you may have about acquiring funding, or whatever it is, whatever your main goal is, right? You can apply the same concept. So if we maybe have, let's say, a bit of a fantasy about something, we're being a bit naive because we are blinded to the negatives, the drawbacks, the risks, and the challenges to it, then all we need to do is simply start listing as many of those negatives of achieving those goals, right? What are the drawbacks? Now, depending on the magnitude of your fantasy, depending on the degree to how naive you may be about it, how many positives you can see, that will then determine the number or the magnitude of negatives that you will need to find and consciously become aware of in order to then neutralize that fantasy to make it a balanced and empowering belief. So what are some drawbacks to acquiring investor or prop capital to trade with? Pause the video now, right, and just start to list some out for yourself. Hopefully you haven't already read the notes below the video, but yeah, give it a go. Right, so in no particular order, here are just a few drawbacks to external funding. Profit splits, right? So whether it's a prop firm or investors, you're going to need to compensate them for risking their capital with you, so you will have to pay them a proportion of any profits that you make back to them. So obviously compared to trading your own capital, right, in your own personal account, where you would get to keep 100% of any profits you make. So that's a pretty clear drawback to, getting funding, right? So what else? Risk limits. So there will always be strict limits surrounding your risk, such as daily drawdown limits, how much you can, lose in a day, your total drawdown, how much you can lose in the account before the account is taken away from you, and many different variations of that. But essentially, you would not have these own restrictions on your own account where you wouldn't have to worry about, someone taking it away from you if you crossed those limits. Time limits. So a lot of prop firms impose time periods in which you need to achieve certain trading requirements. And this can just put a lot of pressure on you, to hit those metrics within that time. And that can really lead you to taking suboptimal trading decisions. Profit targets. So, similarly, you may need to achieve certain amounts of profit in order to, initially acquire the funding, or in order to receive a payout, or in order to get your account scaled up. And, they can combine this with time limits too. Consistency rules. So some firms will want to see that you are always, using pretty much the same lot size on your trades, the same stop loss size, etc., so that your trading behavior to them is very uniform. But this can often be extremely restricting when you compare it to the realities of how you actually wish to trade and how your strategy might be designed. So then there's also leverage restrictions. So funding firms may not give you access to large enough leverage to allow you to execute multiple positions at a time. And this can have a particularly restricted effect on traders who maybe use tight stop losses or who use higher amounts of risk. And what that can happen is it can mean that maybe you can't execute a lot of high probability setups and you have to watch them go without you, and you miss out on all of that potential profit, which you could have capitalized on if you had your own capital, with the necessary amount of leverage that you required. News restrictions. So, most firms will not let you trade through news. And if an order on your account is triggered around that news window, then you can instantly lose your funding and it's taken away from you. And then you have instantly lost a huge source of income in the blink of an eye. So not being able to trade through the news, it can also mean that you can't hold on to trades long term, which can have serious consequences if you are more of a swing trader, right? So if you want to hold on those trades for longer periods of time. Time payouts. So most of the time, you can't just withdraw your money whenever you want to. You have to wait maybe every 2 weeks or usually every month or maybe even longer. And then, of course, you also have to wait for their admin team to process your request. And then you have to wait for their broker to process it too. So you are at the mercy of them for when you can actually get your hands and get access to your capital if you need to do so. Restricted asset classes and instruments. So you'll most likely be restricted in what you can trade, only certain pairs or only certain assets, which obviously is not an ideal restriction, right? Restricted broker choice. So usually they will force you to trade with a particular broker, and this broker may not have trading conditions that are conducive to your strategy, right, or your style of trading. They may have wider spreads or maybe even higher commissions compared to other brokers, which of course, if you're trading your own capital, right, you have the freedom to choose whichever broker is best suited for you. Firm bankruptcy. So again, you're at the mercy of that firm, right? They could go under at any time for any reason. And we've seen this a lot, right, with some of these recent prop firms that are popping up. They're disappearing pretty quickly. And then what's happened? You've lost your source of income. And if they take away the account or refuse to pay your profit split, right, there's some firms that have kind of some scrupulous activities, right? You have to be aware of these possible risks. So the rules and the terms and conditions changing, right? Firms can change these in the future, and suddenly they may not be conducive to your style or your strategy, and you may not be able to trade successfully based on those new rules or conditions. So fees, you'll obviously have to either pay a fee in order to attempt to acquire funding, or some firms, some firms actually charge ongoing monthly fees just to have ongoing access to their capital or their software, which of course, you're not going to need to pay that if it was just your own funds. Tax, so a lot of the times you'll essentially be, legally viewed as a contractor to those firms when you're trading prop firm capital. And this might not be the most tax efficient way to trade in whatever country you reside in. So obviously you will have a few more options open to you, most likely if it was just your own capital. And then finally, kind of job security kind of translates into all of those points because, essentially when you are relying on other people, this is never as secure as being 100% independent and self-sufficient. So I'll leave that there. Of course, there are plenty more, potential perceived negatives to acquiring funding to trade with. But hopefully you can start to see that, acquiring funding is really not the be all and end all. It's an extremely, extremely powerful way to get access to, initial capital that many people would not otherwise have. Prop firms are honestly an amazing service. I wish they were around and, as prominent and sophisticated as they are today. But back when I was first trading out, but you guys have a really great opportunity only if you need and, only if you want it. But don't put it up on this big, massive pedestal. You can grow your own personal account with or without it. There are plenty of other options that will be available to you. Now, in fact, if you do want to, if you do want or you want to acquire funding, I would always advise that you withdraw any of your profits and you use that to build your own personal account kind of as quickly as possible, so that you then become more and more self-efficient to then reduce those risks of the firm that we have just listed. Right. You want to understand that all of life is coming to you at the speed of light. And within those light particles, there is positive and negative. All of the things that you think are positive now, you will eventually come to realize that there are negatives. And all of the things that you think are negative now, you'll eventually realize the positives to it. And if you really, really understand this at your core, anything that happens to you or comes at you in real life, if you perceive it negatively at first, you'll be looking around. Oh, where's the positive? Oh, there it is. Hello. And if things are really positive, you'll be thinking, oh God, where's the drawback here? And then when you go back and you find the drawback, you neutralize your fantasy and naivety, and it pulls you back into presence. It pulls you back from your future imagination back into the present. Now, likewise, in the other situation, When you go and find the blessings in things, then you neutralize fear and resentment, and it again pulls you back into presence. Now, at the point of presence, your mind is then operating maximally. You have the highest probability of thinking creatively and tapping into your inspiration and tapping into your genius, because being present is when you can operate at peak performance. This is where you create mastery. It's called being poised. But the alternative is being poisoned by your emotions. Swinging back and forth between the polarities of perceived negatives and positives. Now, some people, they can sort of grasp and understand this concept to a certain degree, but even if the sort of people, can actually intellectualize that, they still get themselves in these situations where, yeah, man, I understand that, everything is balanced, and I can look for the blessings and the drawbacks, and I can neutralize myself, and I can get back into presence and poise, but this happened to me. They did this, and that is, wow, that is a bad thing. My relationship, my partner, my boss, something fucking happened. So in many people's minds, there are exceptions to this law. And these exceptions, by the way, are created from their polarized understanding. And so these are perpetuated with things like, relationships, they're meant to be happy, peaceful, and supportive. Okay, well, if that's the case, show me one single fucking relationship in the history of humanity that has always been one-sided, always been positive, happy, peaceful, and supportive. I bet you can't find a fucking single one, right? Because they are both. They are meant to be both. And to the degree that you truly understand this, you can have fun. And to the degree that you don't, you're going to have a really shit time. Imagine a coin toss, right? 50-50. Imagine flipping that coin 1,000 times, 10,000 times a day, and you had this ridiculous belief that it's meant to land on heads every time. So then when it lands on heads, you think, fuck yeah, you get excited, you get elated, you get euphoric, and you get dopamine, right? You become a dope. But imagine now when it lands on tails. Imagine seeing that and now thinking, fuck, something's wrong with the coin, something's wrong with me, this is terrible, and you get depressed. 50% of the time, you're going to get depressed. Could you imagine the volatility in that relationship? That is how people live their fucking relationships, right? It's called bipolar, because they are addicted to the one pole, to the one side. So then they get nailed every time that the other side shows up. And, drugs isn't going to fix that. If you've got bipolar and you're popping pills, the reason you've got bipolar, it isn't because you've got a lack of the fucking drugs coursing through your veins. It's because your understanding of the universe is fucking misaligned. And you're frustrated. Everything's fucked up. The government's fucked. My partner's fucked. My wife's a bitch. My husband's a dickhead. My friends and all the thing. The world is a shit show. You're going to have one hell of a shitty life with that kind of belief. Imagine the quality of life that you could have if it didn't matter what side of the coin was showing up. Heads or tails, positive or negative, good or bad, happy or sad, peace or war, cooperation or competition. No matter what side shows up, fuck yeah, I'm going, I'm having a hoot, bring it on, bitch. Right? So when you have that fantasy, of what achieving whatever that big specific goal is, what you have, and what that will mean for you in your head when you achieve it, in your imagination of the future, if you can neutralize and dissolve that fantasy by listing out just as many drawbacks, challenges, and risks to achieving that goal, then your beliefs will become more realistic, balanced, and empowering, and you will increase the probability of successfully achieving it. Because you are acting with a poised and balanced mind, not a mind poisoned with emotions. Now, I'm not here to sell you a dream. I could do that to try and sell more, course subscriptions or whatever. I could sit here and just say, you should all go for funding and blah, 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 blah. Because, maybe then I can whack a nice fancy figure on the website saying X amount of students have got funded, which, that's cool. It really is. And of course, that does mean something significant. But my bigger goal is to make independent and consistently profitable traders. So I want to help you get funding. Of course, only if that's what you want and you think you need. But more than that, I don't just want to get you funded, because what I care about is you actually being able to keep and maintain that funding. I want you to achieve and maintain profitable consistency. That's what I care about, because then that is sustainable and you are then self-sufficient, because you will have that skill that no one can take away from you. And then you become the asset. And that's why we're already working on your mindset from the very get-go. All right? Now, just to finish the lesson on a bit more of kind of a general point about your goals overall, not just specifically to funding, and that is that achieving your goals that you have set out, there of course will be drawbacks in order for you to achieve those. So if you are determined enough and you're willing to pay the price that is attached to your goals, I genuinely and truly believe that you can achieve anything you want. Now, obviously, right, that is within the laws of physics. I would hope that that goes without saying. You never really know these days. I don't need to start thinking that you can try to fly or something. Actually, you know what? Fuck it. If that's what you want to try to do, who am I to stop you, eh? Right, but anyway, going back to this for a second, what does paying the price actually mean? Well, paying the price, that often consists of a lack of time to socialize. You're going to quickly realize that if you want to have success in this business, you're probably not going to be able to go out, getting drunk every weekend or spending all of your spare time partying. That is not how you're going to get ahead. You don't have to become a monk or a nun to be a successful trader, but you don't need to see your friends every single weekend, right? It's all about finding that balance. And you might even be cash strapped for long periods of time, because when you're first starting out and you're digging down in the trenches and you're trying to learn and master your craft, there's going to be a period where you're not making any money whilst you earn your stripes and you earn your badges. That's all just part of the game if you want to achieve the high reward for later in life. You also probably find that you may start growing apart from some of your friends who maybe are not on the same journey as you and who don't now share the same values as you. So just bear in mind that you are the average of your 5 closest friends. And of course, you may also find, right, that you have less time for family than maybe you would like, so you're going to have to sacrifice this a little bit. But find that balance, and remembering that, achieving success with trading, it will likely give you that freedom to spend a hell of a lot more time with them in the not so distant future than potentially what you can right now. Also, it's probably going to start to get harder and harder to find others of a similar mindset to you to actually go and date, because most people are just not going to understand or accept you pursuing your goals, but also the work and the dedication and the sacrifice that it actually requires. So you will feel misunderstood a lot of the time, and you can experience a degree of loneliness during your journey. Trading is a very, very unusual pursuit. Most people just don't get it. Most people, they just see the risk, they just think it's gambling. Most people honestly have no fucking idea what real trading is about. So a lot of the times, when I meet people, I pretty much never actually tell them that I'm a trader. Usually I just tell them I work in finance or something, or, if feeling a little bit more up to it, maybe I'll just make up sort of, a bit more of an interesting lie. Maybe I'll just tell them that I shave dolphins for a living, or, something ridiculous like that, just to avoid the inevitable conversation that often, leads from telling them that you trade. So this is why I've built this community, right? To get like-minded individuals like you all together in one place. So you guys and girls, can network together here. You can share your goals. You can build each other up, and you can try and make that journey as smooth and as efficient, and as enjoyable as possible. Because at the end of the day, what the hell is the point in trying to do all of this if you're not having fun along the way? I'm sure you've all heard people say, focus on the process is the prize. And that is so, so true, because if you don't enjoy the actual journey and the pursuit of your goals, then you're wasting your life, in my opinion, right? You're wasting your time. So try to learn to enjoy the perpetual highs and lows that you will inevitably experience. Because you guys are enlightened now, right? You understand that any highs that you are experiencing, there are just negatives that you haven't quite perceived just yet. But then on the flip side, if you're having a really fucking shitty day, right, you're experiencing those lows, guess what? You just haven't had the time or the wisdom yet to see the actual benefits to the lows that you may be experiencing. And I promise you, you will get quicker and quicker and quicker at doing that. And then the swing of the pendulum becomes smaller and smaller. And that is when you will find everything emotionally just a hell of a lot easier. And then life just becomes, the smooth, fun, flexible game. So I guess just be aware of, the price that are attached to your goals, but having, the discipline to achieve your goals, it's actually choosing between what you may want now and what you want most. So although there are prices attached to your goals, remember there are also benefits to all of those perceived drawbacks. The main one being, of course, right, that these drawbacks will help you to actually achieve your goals. But also, for example, let's say growing apart and shedding some of your old friends. Is that really such a bad thing? Not spending as much time with people who aren't really going anywhere in life and are just holding you back. Now you are going to be networking with and attracting people into your life who are playing at a much, much higher level, and people who will actually push you to do better and improve and try and pull you up to their level, right? Rather than pulling you down and holding you back. So you can see how you can constantly keep doing this process now to look for positives where you couldn't see them before, and look for negatives, in your positive fantasies that maybe you were consciously blinded to before. So the more balanced, realistic, and empowering your beliefs are, the greater your probability of success will be.